In our last lesson, we talked about natural selection and how it works and what Darwin's observations were that led him to draw conclusions about what he was seeing to form his idea for evolution by natural selection. Everything that we talked about in the last lesson were based on Darwin's own observations. And the evidence that I am about to give you has come since he has published his work in 1855. So these are all from a large body of evidence that have come from the past 150 some odd years. As technology has improved and our knowledge has increased, and the idea of evolution through natural selection has been tested over and over and over again, an increasing body of evidence has been created to continue the support, and which is why we talk about evolution as being a theory. The first line of evidence is called homologous structures. Homologous structures are, homologous is a fancy word that means the same. So these are structures in different organisms. That indicate a shared ancestry. What exactly does that mean? Well, once Darwin had come up with his idea, and the natural world was being explored in great detail and in a way that had never been explored before, people started noticing things about different organisms, and that there were similarities within the inner workings of the organism. So the little sketch that I'm giving for you guys right now is the forelimb of 4 very different organisms. From their bone structures. And the colors are denoting where the organism's structures are the same. So you might be able to tell from our first picture, this is the arm of a human. In our second picture, this is the foot of a dog. In our third picture, this is going to be the foot of a bird. And in our fourth picture, this is the fin of a whale. So all four of these organisms have the same bone structure. Our metacarpals, our radius, our ulna, and our humerus, and they have homologous structures in each location in vastly different organisms. The only way that that could have happened is if at some point along the way they all had an ancestor in common. If homologous structures are features that are actively used by organisms, sometimes organisms have features that are remnants of a time and they don't use them anymore. These are called vestigial structures. A vestigial structure is going to be an organ or a structure that serves no useful purpose. Because we wouldn't waste the energy to create something to be part of our body if we weren't going to actively be using it. The prime example for vestigial structures is the appendix, which is part of our digestive system. It hangs out near the large intestine and the stomach. And they believe that it is a leftover organ from when our ancestors ate a lot more roughage than we do, and it helped them with digestion. Another example would be a tailbone, our coccyx, which I'm sure I said that wrong, at the base of our spine, is considered to be a vestigial structure. Sometimes we have extra ligaments in our arms or in the back of our hand that we don't use anymore because we don't have all the muscles that we used to have. And some of you might be able to wiggle your ears. Those muscles are left over from a time when we used to really rotate our ears to help us with hearing. Another line of evidence that is often used is the fossil record. Now, I hope that you guys remember when we did our Earth Science unit, we talked about how as you are digging down in through the layers of the Earth, the further down you go, the deeper you go, the further back in time you are going, because sediments land on top of other sediments, and so the top layer is going to be the youngest. So people realized pretty quickly that fossils in deeper layers are very different from organisms that are alive today. Why is that important? Because this suggests change over time. So here is my today layer, which is on the surface. And as we begin to dig down through these layers, right at our surface, I'm going to see the modern mammals. So these are animals that are alive today. In a layer a little bit further down, before modern mammals, I'm going to see things like monkeys and apes. And then I'm going to see early mammals. Paleontologists who are digging through these layers are going to be studying the Cenozoic era. ERA. In my next couple sets of layers, this is where I'm going to find the dinosaurs. These are the Mesozoic. And if I continue to dig down even deeper below the dinosaurs, I begin to see my earlier reptiles, my bony fish, my jawless fish, these are my primitive fish, and then invertebrates. So these are our first insects and whatnot. And this is the Paleozoic. So as I dig down through the layers, I'm going to dig back and find the earliest fossils are going to be small things like insects, then fishes, then reptile, dinosaurs, early mammals, monkeys, apes, modern mammals. So as I go down through the layers of the earth, I'm going to go further back in time. So the deeper you dig, the further back in time you go. So they use this methodology to look at other things besides what creatures were alive. They use it to look at what the environment was like as well. So if I was digging through my layers and I found a crab followed by a turtle or a frog, followed by a bird, followed by, I don't know, like a fox, then I might know that over time the environment has changed from one that was completely aquatic to one that was a little drier because frogs live on land, to one that maybe was woodland because now we have a bird, to forest because now I have a predator. So by going down in the layers, you can see how animals have changed over time. The next line of evidence is definitely a more modern one. That is genetic similarities. Now, when Darwin was making his observations, genetics was still even 10 years away from being even thought of. So the first real experiments about how inheritance occurs didn't happen for until 10 years after Origin of Species was published. So the genetic similarities have all been discerned within my lifetime. So within the past 30 or 40 years or so. Genetic similarities show similarities between closely related organisms as compared to organisms that are not as closely related. So what does that mean? That means if I compared the genome or all of the genes of everybody in this class, for example, or from one human to the next, doesn't matter where you are from in this whole entire world, humans are 99.9% the same. That if you looked at the sequence of every single person in this room, they are essentially the same. We have 46 chromosomes. And a chromosome is kind of what holds, they're like folded up little balls of DNA. If I was to compare a human to a chimpanzee, we are 96% similar. Now, when we are talking about comparing to another species, chimps have 48 chromosomes. Their genome is just a little bit bigger than ours, so that's one way that they are different. When we are comparing chromosomes or genetic material, we are lining up the sequence of all of their genes and all of our genes and seeing which ones are the same and what is the role that those genes are playing. Most of them are structural, so they're making proteins and whatnot. And 96% of the genes that we have are exactly the same as what a chimpanzee has. How are we compared to an organism that is more different than us? Humans have 90% similar to cats. Cats have a smaller genome than us. They only have 38 chromosomes. If you were to compare humans and mice, and these are all of the genes that encode for proteins. Mice have a much smaller genome than us. They only have 20 chromosomes. And we are 80% similar to cows. So when I'm talking about us being similar, we look nothing like a cow. How can we be similar? Cows have about 22,000 genes. When you compare all of a cow's genes to those of a human, 14,000 are exactly the same. So cows and us have 14,000 genes that encode for the exact same proteins to do the exact same job. The only way that would happen is if at one point in time we came from the same ancestor. The last line of evidence that I'd like to give to you today is embryonic similarity. So I hope that you guys know that an embryo is a very early stage of development for most animals. Well, for plants as well. But we're only talking about embryonic development right now in the animal kingdom. So folks have found that embryos of different organisms look similar. Meaning if you had an embryo of 4 different organisms all under the microscope, they would all look very much the same. And more importantly, than our embryos just looking similar is that many embryos contain characteristics of other organisms. But lose them during development. For example, even we have gills at one stage during our embryonic development, and we lose them because we use lungs to breathe. Now, I have said that evolution takes a long time. What are the mechanisms for evolution? In most cases, evolution does not happen overnight. It is a very gradual thing. So the idea that it takes a very long time, change is slow, this is called gradualism. When the change is very slow, the environment is very stable, nobody has an edge over anybody else, it takes a very long time. Another method of evolution is called adaptive radiation. Adaptive radiation occurs as a species moves into a new location. So they are expanding their range, maybe they've migrated to a new place, maybe they got blown to one island from another. So as a species moves into a new location, it becomes better adapted to its environment. This is what happened with Darwin's finches. One species of finch made it to the Galapagos Island, and then, depending on what the environment of the individual island was, the finches either developed a big strong beak so that they could eat the nuts and seeds that were there, or they developed the long thin beak so that was better at grasping bugs or eating the different fruits that were available to it. So adaptive radiation can take place over a long period of time too. Sometimes there is a dramatic event. And evolution happens quickly, over the course of just a few generations. This is called punctuated equilibrium. Punctuated meaning a dramatic, equilibrium coming back into balance. Punctuated equilibrium is the process of speciation, creation of a species, occurs rapidly between periods of little change. So you can imagine a scenario, for example, where maybe the earth heats up very quickly in a very short period of time, or conversely, during one of the ice ages where the earth was warming and then all of a sudden it started to cool again very quickly. These are processes that happen within a few generations to cause speciation. The prime example of punctuated equilibrium, though, is the peppered moth. The peppered moth lives in England, is where it is found. This moth is light gray. With black sprinkles. Sorry, speckles. S-P-E-C-K. With speckles of black on its wings and body. You can imagine that it probably looks like lichen found on the sides of trees. In the 1700s and early 1800s in England, we've talked a little bit about how the Industrial Revolution very quickly led to all sorts of changes all around the world. One of these changes was the burning of coal. And the depositing of soot all over every surface, everywhere. So the soot pollution begins to turn the trees black. So you can imagine if you are a light colored moth and your main place to hang out begins to change color, you are now going to stand out like a sore thumb. These light colored moths are easily seen against the soot colored trees. And they get eaten by birds. And you would think that this would be the end of the peppered moth. However, because of natural variation that occurs within the population shifts. To black colored moths. Because all of the light colored moths get killed. They get eaten and they're not around to lay eggs. So only the dark colored moths are the ones to survive. So the population shifts very quickly. Many generations go by and all that we see are the black colored moths. But as technology changes and the coal burning eases up and the pollution lessens, so the pollution lightens up and the trees recover, Now the dark moths are the ones that are standing out against the tree bark. The population shifts to gray again. And so these are different ways that evolution can take place. Very slowly, because not much is changing. It can happen very quickly because a new organism has moved into an area and is better adapted to the environment, or the environment itself changes very quickly and the organism has to adapt in order to survive in the environment.